that either. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
The Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke.
"1,200 British troops are on their way to Sarajevo to reinforce the UN peacekeepers. They'll be backed up by heavy artillery in an effort to open up the aid route into the capital. The government defends its secret talks with Sinn Féin. And the American, John Daly, heads for victory in the open. Good evening. More than 1,000 British troops, part of the United Nations Rapid Reaction Force, are on their way to protect Sarajevo from further attacks by the Bosnian Serbs. The mission of Task Force Alpha is a direct response to yesterday's attack, which killed 2 French peacekeepers. A route from Vitez to Mount Igman, which overlooks Sarajevo, will be secured by troops from the Devon and Dorset Regiment, backed by armoured vehicles of the Household Cavalry. From Mount Igman, Task Force Alpha will be able to use heavy guns of the Royal Artillery to locate and counter any Bosnian Serb shelling of the city. Tom Carver has sent this report from Vitez.
The decision to deploy Task Force Alpha was made overnight, within hours of the French soldiers being killed. Having received his orders, the Task Force commanding officer, Colonel Jeff Cook, flew into Vitez to brief his troops. They already knew that something was up. Since first light, they'd been preparing themselves and their vehicles for deployment. The task force will consist of the Devon and Dorset Regiment and 2 batteries of heavy guns from 19 Regiment Royal Artillery, as well as a small detachment of the Household Cavalry. Their mission is to put the British guns onto Mount Igman, currently a demilitarized zone. From there, they'll be used to take out Serb artillery around Sarajevo, but they'll also be vulnerable to attack themselves. It's a dangerous mission which may well bring the UN into direct conflict with the Bosnian Serbs. Colonel Cook said they would only fire in response to a direct attack on UN troops.
Our aim is to reinforce Sector Sarajevo so they have the ability to respond to direct BSA targeting of UNPROFOR units, be they in Sarajevo or on Mount Igman.
Do you think it's likely that you're going to be engaged in artillery duels with the Bosnian Serbs?
There is a very high likelihood of that sort of activity, naturally.
After so much uncertainty and confusion about their role out here, these troops are relieved to have a job to do, but many are clearly anxious about what lies ahead. The detailed orders and rules of engagement are still being worked out, for this is an open-ended mission. The deployment of these forces marks a major escalation for the UN. The UN insists that they will only be used to protect their own troops, but once in place there'll be tremendous pressure on them to stop Serb attacks on innocent civilians as well. Tom Carver, BBC News, Vitez.
The Defence Secretary, Michael Portillo, says the main mission of the task force will be to protect the UN's humanitarian activities in Sarajevo. He stressed it did not represent a shift from peacekeeping to war fighting. Though Mr. Portillo reaffirmed the Allies' determination to defend the UN's so-called safe areas of Sarajevo and Gorazde, he admitted it was no longer possible to protect Jepa, another UN safe area, and he made no mention of the safe area of Bihac, where fighting is intensifying.
It's been a day of ferocious fighting across Bosnia. The so-called safe area of Bihac is under attack not only by Bosnian and Croatian Serbs, but also by these rebel Muslims. Desperate to save Bihac, the Bosnian government have reached a new agreement with Croatia to defend the enclave, because if Bihac falls, Croatian Serbs will then be able to link up with their counterparts in Bosnia. But what of the other safe areas like Jepa? It's now clear that Friday's London conference effectively agreed to abandon Jepa.
It has reached a stage now where I don't think that the United Nations and NATO using air power can be decisive in that. We have drawn a line, and we have drawn it at Gorazde, where we are in a position to issue an effective deterrent. We cannot do everything. We cannot save all the lives that we would like to save. We cannot offer protection everywhere that we would like to.
Today there are ham radio reports of heavy Serb tank and infantry attacks on Jepa, but the Bosnian government say the battle there is far from over, and they want to know why the enclave has been written off.
Before they are dead and buried, as one would have it, there is a conference that is already burying them. and putting a tombstone above their heads. These people are not dead. They're very much alive. They're very much suffering today.
And as the Sarajevo safe area also came under fresh attack, the only good news for the Bosnian government was that the arms embargo against it is apparently being scrapped by a group of powerful Islamic nations, though the Serbs say that will simply escalate the war.
Maybe Albania and Macedonia, maybe Macedonians and Albanians in Macedonia, Turkey and Greece. Then, in that case, it may be triggering Third World War.
Several UN peacekeepers have been injured and 2 French soldiers killed in the latest attacks by Bosnian Serbs, who seem to be challenging world leaders to back up Friday's threats with deeds. Ben Brown, BBC News.
And joining us now from Sarajevo is Jeremy Bowen. Jeremy, given that the credibility of the UN is close to zero at the moment, will the arrival of the new units help to change that at least?
Well, long term perhaps. It all depends what they do. Now at the moment, as you've been hearing, those guns are there to respond to attacks on UNPROFOR, UN's troops here in Sarajevo alone, not on civilians. I think that as far as the Bosnian government's concerned, if the deployment of those guns brings the UN a step closer towards peace enforcement, then maybe it will rebuild some of their credibility here.
Jeremy, given that there's been a consistent level of scepticism, understandably, among the people of Sarajevo, do you think that they are now more convinced, perhaps, that the UN's intentions are more likely to be borne out realistically and effectively?
No, they're absolutely not convinced. No question about that. Short term, these guns may mean that the Igman route brings in more food to Sarajevo, perhaps. Longer term, it all depends on whether or not Britain and France pick up the gauntlet that has this weekend been put down by the Serbs around Bihac and here in Sarajevo. If they do that, if they move, I'm afraid, towards peace enforcement, which may well mean going down a road which could lead to war with the Bosnian Serbs, well then perhaps.
Jeremy, thanks very much indeed. The government is...
British troops take up position on the hills above Sarajevo. Their UN orders are to protect the supply routes, not the people of the city who are still being shelled. A suicide bomber blows up a bus in Israel, killing 5 people and injuring more than 30 others. 3 Premiership footballers are charged with conspiracy to fix matches. And the most difficult decision, the parents who are asking the law to allow their handicapped son to die. Good evening. Hundreds of British and French troops from the Rapid Reaction Force in Bosnia are now in position on the hills above Sarajevo and are digging gun emplacements on Mount Igman. Their mission has 2 aims: to ensure that a route leading to the city remains open for humanitarian supplies and to protect UN forces if they are fired upon. But it seems the Rapid Reaction Force will not respond if civilians in Sarajevo are shelled. 700 British troops left Vitez yesterday bound for Sarajevo. An advance guard has had the task of securing the Mount Igman road, which is the main route into the city. From the heights of Mount Igman, the British soldiers will be able to use their heavy guns to respond to attacks from the Bosnian Serbs on UN positions in the city.
Level up. 24 hours after being given their orders, the British UN guns are in place on Mount Igman. Not dug in, but ready to respond to any Serb attacks. Despite their white paint, they are in full camouflage and will move around this mountain to prevent them from being detected. The guns were brought onto Mount Igman as dawn broke, using the cover of darkness. It was a difficult and dangerous operation. The entire task force, consisting of more than 150 vehicles, had to be brought up this narrow track, the only route into Sarajevo not controlled by the Serbs. Daylight revealed a number of casualties, but no serious injuries. By early morning, the ammunition for the guns began to arrive. There is enough ammunition here to do considerable damage to the Serbs' capability. The UN is hoping that the sheer scale of this operation will be enough to deter the Serbs from attacking.
As far as the targets are concerned, we've been taking a great deal of pains over the last weeks to ensure that we know as much as possible about the weapon positions of any of the warring factions.
And I'm happy now that we have a great deal of information that we could use to fire on those weapon positions if they fire at us.
At the foot of Mount Igman, French reinforcements of light tanks and armoured personnel carriers. Always wanting to up the ante, these French legionnaires have refused to paint their vehicles white, which they say suggests surrender. So the result is a confusing message being sent to the warring parties. The local population have greeted all this with indifference. They've seen too many UN missions here come and go to be impressed by even this display of firepower. Their faith in the international community is all but exhausted. All they can do is try to live a normal life in a very abnormal world. Even as we stood on Mount Igman, the shelling continued over our heads, though this time not aimed at the UN. Nonetheless, the commanding officer of the task force said he was pleased with what had been achieved so far.
The fact that the guns are not dug in does not hinder in any way their battle readiness.
This deployment has brought the UN right to the front line of this war. Now they're here, they have to decide what to do. In its first deployment, the Rapid Reaction Force has undoubtedly lived up to its name. But the UN's mission in Bosnia is becoming increasingly blurred by this operation. Is this an army or is it a peacekeeping force? It's becoming increasingly hard to tell. Tom Carver, BBC News, Mount Igman.
The UN says that fighting has intensified in the government-held enclave of Bihac. The town is now being attacked by a combination of Bosnian and Croat Serbs, as well as troops loyal to the rebel Muslim leader Fikret Abdic. And in Sarajevo, the city is counting the cost of a weekend of fighting that's left many dead and wounded.
As the UN arrived on Mount Igman last night, shells were coming in and going out of Sarajevo. The Serbs kept their fire away from the peacekeepers, but one of their shells destroyed the Dojo family. Their friends gathered outside the remains of their house. They cried for 3-month-old Belmin, his aunt, and his great-grandmother, who were killed. In the 24 hours until 9 today, a total of 8 people, including 2 children, were killed in the city. 9 children and 27 adults were wounded. But the UN says its guns on Mount Igman will respond to attacks on peacekeepers, not civilians. And in case there was any confusion, they said it not once, but twice.
I'll repeat that if I may. Their mission is to respond to attacks on UNPROFOR installations, convoys and personnel in Sarajevo.
17,000 children killed in Bosnia. What else? And now they say we place mortars. Do not place mortars. Send planes if you like to help. If you do not want to help, then leave Bosnia alone and give us back our right of self-defense.
So the people of this city, a UN-safe area, aren't any safer yet, and neither is Bihac in the northwest. Serbs and rebel Muslims have attacked on all fronts and have taken more than 75 square kilometers. The UN says it could all get much worse. It's already getting worse in the supposedly safe area of Žepa, where the Serbs are said to have broken through some Bosnian positions this afternoon. The Western Allies' problem is they still haven't made clear which enclaves they will protect and how they'll do it. If it's to be airstrikes, they haven't said who's giving the orders. In this city, they hope that NATO, not the UN, will be in charge. Otherwise, their fear is that once more, the West's response will be too little, too late. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
On Mount Igman, above Sarajevo.
The US Defense Secretary William Perry has warned tonight NATO is prepared to carry out intensive airstrikes if Serb forces continue their attacks on Muslim-safe areas. The Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, said that the Allies had made it clear that their determination was, to the Serb military commander General Mladic, to defend these areas. NATO ambassadors will meet again tomorrow to consider the details of any air response. However, as Peter Morgan now reports, the enclave of Bihac is now under immediate threat as rebel Serb forces advance within a few miles of the city itself.
It's the heaviest fighting Bosnia has seen in several months. For the last 5 days, Croatian Serb forces have been making marked gains around Bihac. Officials from the UN say the Serb forces have taken up to 30 miles from the Bosnian army. Bihac is within the sights of Serb artillery, but for the moment the Serbs are trying to gain ground without risking a confrontation with NATO. There's been a lull today, but the fighting here could provoke a wider conflict. The Bihac region has a strategic value for all three parties in the Bosnian conflict and their political mentors in Zagreb and Belgrade. The territory is currently controlled by the Sarajevo government's 5th Corps, based near Bihac. The town itself is a UN safe area, but only around 25 square miles are protected. But the fighting is going on further north. Serb soldiers from the Krajina part of Croatia, with support from Bosnian Serb soldiers, have been fighting with the Bosnian army around Petrograd. The Bosnian Serbs want to control road links here in order to link up with their land in Krajina. The Serbs have been helped by rebel Muslim forces from Velika Kladuša, led by local politician Fikret Abdic, a former member of the Sarajevo government. The latest moves have alarmed the UN.
We have reports of an agreement being made by the Bosnian government and the Croatian government with regard to this attack. So we might see more and more factions being pulled into a war in Western Bosnia, and that is very escalatory.
That alarm was fueled by a weekend agreement between the Croatian and Bosnian governments. Croatia's President Tudjman agreed to provide emergency military aid for Bihac, along with greater cooperation with President Izetbegović's army. Behind the deal lies another fear, that Croatia is ready to intervene directly in Bihac or to launch an early attack on Serb-controlled areas within Croatia. But UN officials in Bihac say the Serbs might try to control this area by longer-term measures.
You can strangle this area by not allowing humanitarian aid to come in, or you can capture a huge amount of ground where they're going to harvest now, and therefore it is impossible for the people to harvest, and they are fleeing, and thereby you actually have a situation: no food, no humanitarian convoys, no fertilizers, a lot of refugees, which means actually you slowly are going to strangle the population.
For one group of soldiers, though, the ordeal of Bosnia is over. Dutch UN soldiers held in Srebrenica during the recent Bosnian Serb offensive were welcomed home today by their families. Their military masters in NATO have been trying to iron out differences over the command and control of any future NATO airstrikes. But that meeting adjourned this afternoon without a decision. Such moves are being watched closely by the Russians, who made their doubts clear last Friday. Their Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev is in Belgrade tonight for talks with Serbia's President Milosevic. Russia wants political dialogue rather than NATO action in Bosnia, a point which runs directly opposite to current American thinking.
We have invoked the existing resolutions on safe areas relative to Bihac and Sarajevo. If it's necessary, if it becomes necessary to extend additional authority to protect those safe areas, we would certainly consider doing that.
Earlier in Tuzla, former Polish Prime Minister Tadeusz Mazowiecki arrived to speak to refugees who fled from Srebrenica last week. The UN Special Envoy said he had already heard reports which were not only violations of human rights, but of events which were grossly barbaric.
Peter Morgan reporting.
Abandoned the town. Indicted as war criminals, the Bosnian Serb leaders Radovan Karadzic and General Mladic. An explosion on a Paris regional subway kills at least 3 people and injures many more. The Greenbury Committee again asks the Treasury to rethink its tax on share options. And who took the money dropped by the Irish robber on the run? Good evening. The Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic and his army commander Ratko Mladic have been indicted for war crimes. The Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal says the two have been indicted for genocide and crimes against humanity arising from atrocities perpetrated against civilians throughout Bosnia-Herzegovina. Meanwhile, aid agencies in Bosnia are preparing for thousands more refugees after the Bosnian Serbs' capture of yet another so-called safe area, the town of Žepa. After a series of conflicting reports, a UN team there has confirmed that Serb forces now control the town. The The UN has been negotiating with the Serbs on how to evacuate civilians from the enclave. 17,000 Muslims were besieged in Djepa. 79 Ukrainian UN peacekeepers there have retreated to their main base just outside the town, and about 1,000 Bosnian government troops have retreated to the surrounding area.
The capture of Djepa is General Ratko Mladic's latest military triumph. A week ago, Bosnian Serb TV broadcast these pictures of what were supposed to be surrender talks to back up premature Serb claims that they had taken the enclave. Now the UN says the general has finally done it on the day its own human rights tribunal indicted him and Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb leader, for genocide and crimes against humanity. Both men are being held responsible for atrocities against civilians and for taking hostage UN personnel. But despite that, the UN is still negotiating with them to rescue civilians from Djepa.
We will get a ruling on that from the UN in New York, I am sure. In the meantime, we would take the view that it is better that this dialogue goes on in the interests of what is happening out there than it to be cut at this stage.
Haris Sarajevo, the Bosnian Prime Minister, wants Western governments to do more than deplore war crimes. He wants them to take sides.
The genocide is going on right now in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The problem is that the Western government would not recognize that fact, would not invoke the Genocide Geneva Convention, because it entails some responsibility and some obligation.
To avoid a repeat of the scenes that followed the fall of Srebrenica, he wants UN protection for refugees from Djepa. The UN now has documented evidence of attacks on refugees from Srebrenica by Serb soldiers, which have been passed on to the International War Crimes Tribunal. This morning, the UN spokesman read extracts from the file.
A number of those interviewed reported seeing between 6-10 bodies of people who had been executed by having their throats cut. Persons evacuated on the convoy also have given statements relating to young women being forcibly taken from the displaced persons by Serb soldiers.
In Zenica in central Bosnia, the UN is preparing supplies to avoid what it has called a humanitarian catastrophe. They hope they'll be ready for what looks like the certainty of a huge influx of refugees from Djepa. And with French troops now alongside the British on Mount Igman above Sarajevo, the UN's own security is much improved. The Bosnians are waiting to see if the foreign soldiers can do the same for them. Now that Djepa has gone, the enclave of Bihac is the UN safe area most at risk. It's probably where the UN's resolve will next be tested. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
NATO leaders meeting in Brussels are still deciding who should order future airstrikes in Bosnia and why. The British and French haven't been able to agree with the Americans on the extent UN commanders should be involved.
NATO warplanes were being prepared today for their new, more aggressive role in Bosnia. But whose orders are the pilots of these planes supposed to obey? The Americans want NATO to be in command of any future airstrikes, ending the cumbersome dual key system in which there has to be UN political approval as well. But Britain and France, as troop contributing nations, insist the UN must still have a proper say. So NATO officials arriving at last for a twice-postponed meeting in Brussels today have to come up with a compromise, and it's likely to mean giving more power to both NATO and UN commanders on the ground. Whatever the squabbles, though, Washington is still trying to talk tough to the Bosnian Serb general Ratko Mladic.
Just as Saddam Hussein should have had no doubt in 1990 and 91 that when the United States says we are going to unleash substantial and decisive air power against him, we mean it.
For President Clinton, it's crucial the new threat of airstrikes is credible. He knows it may be the only way to stop congressional leaders abandoning the Bosnian arms embargo. He also knows that time is running out because Congress debates the issue tonight.
All we're suggesting is to give these people a right to defend themselves as they have under Article 51 of the UN Charter.
Already, Islamic nations, which have been busy fundraising for the Bosnian Muslims, have declared the arms embargo invalid. So money like this could soon start buying a flood of guns and ammunition for the Bosnian government. Whatever the American Congress decides, therefore, the arms embargo may be about to collapse anyway. Ben Brown, BBC News.
Members of the Greenbury Commission
have been pouring out of the so-called safe area of Žepa, which has fallen to the Bosnian Serbs. Around 1,400 people, mostly women, children and elderly people, have arrived at the Bosnian crossing point of Kladan, where they've given harrowing accounts of life under siege. A further 160 refugees are being treated in the capital, Sarajevo. So far, there's no news of the men left behind in Žepa. The UN says it wants to avoid a repeat of the atrocities which were committed after the fall of Srebrenica.
The Žepa convoy came into Sarajevo under UN escort. They travelled all night across eastern Bosnia. Since their town fell to the Serbs, the only part of the east still under Bosnian government control is Gorizda. The rest of it has been ethnically cleansed. They were taken to Sarajevo's main hospital. Some of these people were as reluctant to talk about what happened to them as the outside world has been to listen. Why should we talk, one said. If you weren't there with us for the last 3 years, you don't need to know. This man apologized. She's tired, frightened and hungry, he said. Stories like theirs have been heard many times in this war, but they should be heard again. They're the latest victims of the Bosnian Serbs, whose leaders have now been indicted by the United Nations for war crimes. Crimes against people like this. General Ratko Mladic, commander of the Bosnian Serb army, has been charged with genocide and crimes against humanity. He's been in Žepa inspecting the town his men are transforming into a suitable place for Serbs. He agreed to let the UN escort the refugees out of Žepa only after a long negotiation with Rupert Smith, the British general who commands the UN troops here. His spokesmen say the charges against General Mladic will not affect their working relationship. On the other side of the front line, thousands of refugees have now arrived at the government-held town of Kladan. Thousands more are on the way. The UN has been defending the deal it made with indicted Bosnian Serb war criminals. It says the ethnic cleansing of Žepa has been much less painful for the people than the ethnic cleansing of Srebrenica 2 weeks ago. But it's still ethnic cleansing, which the UN regards as genocide, and for the people of Žepa, it's still painful. Back in Sarajevo, some of the new refugees were lucky enough to find relations waiting for them. Most had nobody. This is only part of the human cost of the UN's failure in eastern Bosnia. It was supposed to defend these people, but it broke its promise. They said the men of fighting age had retreated into the forest to continue the war, and they said they still had their weapons. This man said his son had been killed and his grandson was fighting on. He said he'd believed in Britain, America and the UN, but they'd all betrayed the Bosnian people. Hasia Imamovic was too tired and too shaken to get off the bus. Like all of them, she's been trapped in Žepa, a mountain village, for more than 3 years. Now she's been thrown out by force to a desperate and uncertain future. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
Police have raided homes. The International Committee of the Red Cross has been allowed to visit Muslim prisoners captured by the Bosnian Serbs when they took Srebrenica. A team visited a detention camp at Batkovic in northeastern Bosnia yesterday and has spent all day at another in Bratunac, north of Srebrenica today. Meanwhile,
it is important that we have been able to visit these people in Batkovic for many reasons. I mean, the first one is, of course, to register them. You know that when RCRC is registering prisoners, that means in other words, that these people can no more disappear. So it's quite important. According to our criteria as well, we assess the condition of detention and we enable the prisoners to write Red Cross messages in order for them to establish the links with their family.
Meanwhile, the expulsion of refugees is continuing from Žepa, the other safe haven to have fallen to the Bosnian Serbs.
On the road out of Žepa, lorries carrying the human reality of what the UN condemns as ethnic cleansing. The fallen town's Muslim women and children, together with just the elderly men, were being shipped out by the Bosnian Serbs, their military commander there to oversee the operation.
Kako ste? Ja sam General Mladic.
How are you? I'm General Mladic, he said. You must have heard lots about me. Don't be afraid, nothing will happen to you. You are free. Thank you, they murmured. Tired, hungry and frightened, they were then asked whether any Bosnian Serb soldiers had mistreated them or raped them. No, they told the man who had their destiny in his hands. Some muttered they were happy to leave. But why? My children were always hungry and thirsty. They're so frightened, she said. The Bosnian Serbs maintain these people chose to leave. With their menfolk, homes and possessions behind them, they were being taken to Kledan in government-held territory. Having taken Srebrenica and Djepa, the victorious Bosnian Serb army's attention may yet turn to Gorazde, the remaining eastern safe haven, from which the Serbs claim Muslim forces mount offensives against them. If the Bosnian Serbs have Gorazde in their sights, any move will virtually guarantee NATO airstrikes. Their commander, now formally charged with war crimes, says he's ready to negotiate. I think there's no need to commence operations towards Gorazde. We're offering contacts to resolve the problem peacefully, said General Mladic. If the Muslims give up their weapons, they can still live there. Throughout all this, the Bosnian Serbs have appeared in control, the UN effectively powerless on the side. The Bosnian Serb brinkmanship will continue. International concern will now focus on the fate of the Muslim men of both Srebrenica and Djepa. Many will have been captured or killed. Others have taken to the hills to continue fighting. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News, Parle.
The Secretary-General of NATO, Willy Klaas, has said the American Senate's move to lift the arms embargo on Bosnia could fuel an all-out war in the Balkans. The Bosnian government has welcomed last night's vote, but it's feared that the UN peacekeeping mission would not survive an end to the arms embargo. Today, the French confirmed that they would pull out if it were lifted.
The Bosnian army has no shortage of light weaponry, machine guns and mortars. The embargo has not been watertight, but what it lacks is armour. If the Dole bill became law, the Americans could immediately start to redress that, flying in artillery and armoured vehicles to airstrips inside Bosnia. And joining them, the Islamic nations. Last weekend, they agreed that an embargo they already believe to be immoral, they will from now on ignore. Today, Malaysia said it was setting up a special fund to arm the Bosnian Muslims. The American vote has been welcomed in Sarajevo.
I call this a gut vote. This is about doing the right thing. This is not about politics.
But the dangers of lifting the embargo are real. For a start, the 25,000 UN soldiers in Bosnia would be pulled out. That would mean an end to the aid effort and an upsurge in the fighting as the Serbs make preemptive strikes before the government forces can rearm properly. It's the nightmare scenario that Western leaders were today continuing to warn against.
Do we have guarantees that the military conflict will not enlarge elsewhere? Can the American Senate give me guarantees that in a few months we will not face a general Balkan war?
And that warning was reiterated by the Russians. Moscow said it deeply regretted the Senate vote. The danger is that if the Bosnian Muslims are armed by America, Russia will then arm the Serbs. The two superpowers once again pitted against each other in a proxy war.
This conflict will definitely be internationalized, because by shipping arms, many countries will take sides in the conflict, sooner or later. So the situation will be much worse than now, and I think it would be a wrong and very dangerous move.
There's still a long way to go before these dangers are realized, but the prospect of weapons flooding unrestrained into the field of war must now be closer. Even for its supporters, it's a policy of despair, justified solely by the singular failure of every other policy so far. Hugh Schofield, BBC News.
The mental health enclave in northwest Bosnia. The so-called UN safe area of Bihac has been under Serbian attack since the weekend. But Bosnian Croat forces say they have now captured the key Serb-held town of Grahovo just to the south. The United Nations has warned of an alarming build-up of Croatian troops and has urged maximum restraint on all parties.
These are Serb refugees fleeing ahead of advancing Croatian forces. In the ever more complicated politics of Bosnia, new elements are being sucked into the war. Now it's the Bosnian Serbs' turn to pack up their belongings and leave. The UN estimates there are around 5,000 of them, and they'll be lucky to see their homes again. They're being forced out by a Croat offensive which is aimed at preventing the Serbs capturing Bihac. With help from Croatia, the Croat forces have overrun Serb positions, cut their supply lines and captured some of their guns. They're now turning them back on the Serbs. The UN says Croatian regular forces are crossing into Bosnia and fears that this may spread the war across international borders.
We assess that there are about 8,000 to 10,000 HV or HVO troops in the area, which is a serious and alarming troop build-up. On the Serb side, there has been a mobilization and redeployment of forces.
Croatia's main aim is to regain control of Krajina, the part of its territory held by the Serbs. While the Serbs in Croatia are preoccupied helping the Serbs in Bosnia to attack Bihac, Croatia has massed forces against them in both the west and the east. Serb forces are also on the offensive to the north of the Bihac pocket. Their alliance, which includes rebel Muslim forces, has taken about a third of Bosnian government territory, and they're now within sight of Bihac town, the safe area supposedly under UN protection. NATO has been asked to supply air protection for Bihac along the lines agreed for Gorazda. But with half a dozen armies now involved, it's hard for them to know who they're threatening to attack. Croatian forces this afternoon announced they'd captured a key town which controls the road to Knin, the Croatian Serb headquarters. But each setback for the Serb alliance increases the risk that Serbia proper will enter the war and spread it much wider afield. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News.
Two anthropologists say that...
Now the news with Moira Stewart at 6 o'clock.
Serb troops have been retreating from Bihac, but the UN warns of a wider war after the Croat offensive. Two young boys who went fishing on Merseyside have been found murdered. A Dominic Cork hat-trick sets England on course for victory against the West Indies. But Damon Hill spins out of the German Grand Prix, giving Michael Schumacher an historic victory. Good evening. Serb forces attacking the Bosnian enclave of Bihac are believed to have started withdrawing into Krajina, the Serb-held part of Croatia. The UN has warned of the possibility of the war spreading from Bosnia into Croatia. The Bosnian Croats have already taken 2 towns in western Bosnia, including Glamoc. Matt Fry has just sent this report.
Croatian artillery on its way to the front line 10 miles up the road. These 205mm guns helped the Croats to take Glamoc on Friday. The town had been held by the Serbs for 3 years. Accompanied by a victory chorus, these Croatian soldiers have turned a town of 12,000 inhabitants into a deserted playground. While the population is now on the refugee trail somewhere inside Serbian territory, we were shown the pathetic trophies of war, like this worthless 1 billion dinar note left by people who had to depart in a hurry. For the Bosnian Croats, fighting with arms and men from Croatia itself, Glamoc was an important victory. It's enabled them to cut a key Serbian supply road and to get within artillery range of the Serb stronghold of Knin. The battlefield is still smouldering and the Croatian forces have wasted no time in showing off the spoils of their long-awaited offensive against the Krajina Serbs. But the human consequences are depressingly familiar. This predominantly Serb town has been ethnically cleansed. There were no Serbs left to talk to, so the Croatian forces and their translator introduced us to a small group of Muslims. A happy minority according to the army, but not according to their faces. The Croatian artillery has dug in around Glamoc. More troops and guns are moving up to the front line. It looks as if the offensive is set to continue, pushing Croatia and Serbia to the brink of another all-out war. Matt Fry, BBC News, Glamoc.
The UN Special Representative to the former Yugoslavia, Yasushi Akashi, has been meeting rebel Serb leaders in Krajina today in an effort to stop the conflict spreading from Bosnia. Our diplomatic correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, reports from Zagreb.
Croatia's forces are not on the march just to relieve someone else's territory. Their purpose is the recovery of their own. Krajina, the region lost to the Serbs 4 years ago. The UN Special Representative here, Yasushi Akashi, has little doubt about Croatia's intentions.
The troop movements and the troop concentrations are very menacing, and so the danger of a war breaking out is real.
Mr. Akashi met the Krajina Serb leadership today. He conveyed Croatia's demands: agree to rapid talks or risk attack. The UN expresses little hope that Mr. Akashi's mission will succeed. Croatia is setting demands and a timetable that few here believe the Krajina Serbs will be either able or willing to meet. If that is so, Croatia's military forces, gathered in strength on either side of Krajina, may then be told to put into effect the plan which they've been preparing for several years. If the Serbs in Krajina are attacked by Croatia, there will be pressure on the president of Serbia itself, Slobodan Milosevic, to come to their aid. He met his defense chiefs in Belgrade last night. For the leaders, it is about national pride and power. But as this war threatens to spread still further, for a growing number of ordinary people, both Muslim and now Serb, it means homelessness, suffering, and much worse. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Zagreb.
A Labour MP and a Tory peer have provoked an outcry by holding talks with the Bosnian Serb leaders. The MP, Bob Waring, is chairman of the all-party British Yugoslav group. Another Labour MP, Kate Hoey, said the meeting was amazingly stupid. Mr. Waring and Lord Harlech are in Pale, the Bosnian Serb stronghold. The trip was made without the knowledge of the Labour leadership.
The British delegation was in Pale on a fact-finding mission. Welcomed by the Bosnian Serb Vice President, the Labour MP, Robert Waring, was accompanied by Lord Harlech. Waiting for them and making his first public appearance since being officially charged with genocide, the Bosnian Serb leader, Radovan Karadzic. He said nothing about that, but he wasted no time in telling the British party how seriously he viewed the Croatian army offensive in Western Bosnia.
But this is something big.
This is a much more massive attack.
Very massive aggression requires our regrouping, and we have to defend against them.
Yesterday, Dr. Karadzic ordered a counter-offensive by his own forces. The Bosnian Serb military machine shows every sign of fighting on. After a lengthy meeting, the British party emerged. The talk was of possible peace treaties, even international conferences to end the war, with an apparent willingness by the Bosnian Serbs to participate.
We think we should start the talks and we should reach the peace treaty. That's our ultimate goal.
The idea of an international conference which will look at the situation in the whole of former Yugoslavia is a very sensible one.
But such things have been talked about before, often coming to nothing. The parliamentary delegation spent nearly 4 hours talking to Dr. Karadzic. They say they left with the firm impression that the Bosnian Serb political leadership is only too aware of the gravity of the situation. But what influence on events this small British team can have is open to question. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News, Pale.
Today's other news: and police active against the Bosnian Serbs unless they honour a promise to withdraw from the safe haven of Bihac. The UN believes around 1,000 Bosnian Serbs are still dug in around the enclave. Croatian troops have already struck deep into Bosnia and the Serb-held Krajina region to help relieve Bihac. They've taken 2 strategic towns, Grahovo and Glamoch, and are now threatening the Krajinan capital, Knin.
The Croatian offensive continues and doesn't seem likely to stop until it meets serious opposition. The Battle for Bihac has given Croatia an opportunity to take action against its own rebel Serbs. It's captured towns which have put it within range of Knin, and artillery fire has been directed at villages near the Croatian Serb capital.
There have been reports really for the last 3 or 4 weeks that villages have been shelled, that there have been exchanges of fire between the two sides. So whether the Croatians are claiming that it's in response, whether they were provoked or not, I don't know.
The Croatian Serbs have effectively run their own state based on Knin since 1991. The Croatians want to recover it, and they've rejected UN attempts to negotiate an end to the latest fighting, because whatever that does for Bihac, it does nothing to return control of Krajina to them. And Bosnia's Muslim government is happy for any help it can get.
Up to this point in time, the Croatian actions have been very successful, and I'm sure the people of Bihac feel the relief to some extent already. But unfortunately, this has not been enough to relieve the strangulation. That's why further action is necessary by NATO, or of course through our mutual cooperation with the Republic of Croatia.
Free Serbs!
The Defence Secretary is in Washington meeting his opposite number. Both men have urged restraint lest Serbia be drawn into the war. America has tacitly encouraged the Croats so far by saying it doesn't believe that Serbia is yet ready to engage, but is warning them against pushing their luck too far.
What we are concerned about and what we want to deter is to have the Croatian force now take advantage of that situation to launch a full-scale offensive, because we believe that has the potential of widening the war to the great danger of everybody involved.
Bosnian Muslim armies in central Bosnia are now joining in the battle. The Croat offensive has tipped the campaign in their favour. But there's evidence that the Bosnian Serbs are now switching forces they used against the eastern enclaves to meet this new threat in the west. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News.
A child whose parents want him to be allowed
onto the battlefields of the Balkans threatens a major escalation of the conflict.
Another UN-backed deal broken in the Balkans. Rebel Croatian Serb forces, whose leaders had yesterday promised to end their attacks on the Muslim-held Bihac enclave, were reported this morning to be continuing an assault backed with heavy weapons. It was assumed the Serbs' promise to pull back was simply a ploy to confuse Muslim and Croatian forces after their successes of recent days.
There have been, over the last 2 to 3 days, a certain pull-out of troops and soldiers, but not in a significant number compared with what got into the area before the 19th of July and the time after.
In the Croatian port of Split, new diplomatic ground was being broken. Foreign Minister Velayati of Iran greeted by his Croatian and Bosnian counterparts. Iran is rumoured to have been supplying the Muslim leadership in Sarajevo with arms and money for some time. The Bosnian government, which sees the internationalization of the conflict as its best chance, wants to ensure the Bihac crisis is not ignored.
From our information, the Serbian forces from Croatia as well as Bosnia have not withdrawn from the Bihac pocket. Therefore, we continue to insist upon NATO assistance to the safe area of Bihac, consistent with their commitment. And of course, we continue to call upon the Republic of Croatia, consistent with our agreement on military cooperation, to help.
And the Croatians have in recent days proved that they are now in a position to help both in military and political terms. The success of their combined operation with Bosnian Croat forces in capturing Serb-held towns in western Bosnia last Friday showed that the Serbs can no longer assume the vast arsenal bequeathed to them by the former Yugoslav army will forever give them victory on the battlefield. The deal struck earlier this month between President Tudjman of Croatia and Bosnia's President Izetbegovic meant that the Bosnians were finally rid of their illusions about the UN, which they say has failed them. They're now putting their trust in Franjo Tudjman's army. He felt confident enough of his military strength last night to reject the Croatian Serbs' offer to pull out, wanting them to start talks about handing power back to Zagreb.
Concerning the quick response of President Tudjman to yesterday's agreement of the UN envoy Mr. Akashi with the Croatian Serbs in Knin, for us it's only a Serbian attempt to buy time. That agreement didn't give a single answer to President Tudjman's proposals. Therefore, we don't consider it as a step towards a peaceful solution.
In 1991, Croatia's Serb minority used their superiority in weapons to take control of some 30% of the country. They called it Krajina and declared themselves independent. In a ceasefire agreement, the UN split the rebel-held lands into 4 sectors. That was 3.5 years ago. The Croatians have since become impatient, saying the UN have simply sanctioned the status quo of Serb control. Last May, Croatian forces recaptured Sector West, completely ignoring the UN peacekeepers based there. It was a signal that Zagreb's forces were ready to take on the Serbs. Last Friday, the Croatian army backed up Bosnian Croats in the capture of Grahova and Glamoc inside Bosnia from local rebel Serbs. Over the weekend, Zagreb's forces were reported to be massing around Karlovac, the most obvious jumping-off point for an attempt to help Muslim forces in the beleaguered Bihac enclave. A successful attack there would cut Krajina in 2. Croatian troops are also reportedly grouping to the east and west of Knin, the rebel Serb headquarters in Krajina, and also along the old front line in the east. However, Zagreb would have to be cautious about attacking Sector East, which contains the devastated town of Vukovar. Lying as it does on the border with Serbia, it would be easily reinforced from Belgrade. An action there would certainly bring in the still powerful army of rump Yugoslavia. It was the murderous intensity of the fighting across Croatia, reaching its zenith in Vukovar, which first turned the world's attention towards the Yugoslav war. The violent hatred unleashed was later to spread its poison to Bosnia. But although overshadowed, the dispute between Croats and Serbs was always waiting to flare up again. Now the show of strength by his enemies has made the Bosnian Serb leader use the occasion of a meeting with a US congressman to make a conciliatory gesture. Radovan Karadzic promised to allow aid convoys use a tarmac road leading to Sarajevo.
So from now on, Morgans don't have to use Mount Igman route. They are free to get humanitarian aid through Serbian territory.
The UN aren't taking the offer seriously, as Serbs have made it before and broken their word. But it's significant that the Croatian advances have so quickly brought concessions and a softer line from rebel Serbs. What NATO and the UN never fully learnt was that the Serbs will only take seriously a protagonist who threatens to use force and then carries out that threat.
Gabirado. I've been speaking to the American ambassador to Croatia, Peter Galbraith, and I asked him whether the Croats really are determined to fight to the death to win back the Krajina.
Well, the Croatian government has made clear for some time its intention to recover the Krajina. It has stated its preference to recover it through a negotiated process, but has made clear that if that doesn't work, it intends to take military action to do so.
What do you think the international community ought really to be doing then, beyond what Mr. Akashi is already trying to do?
Well, the international community ought to be counseling restraint. We ought to be, and indeed we, the United States, are counseling restraint. We are urging the Krajina Serbs to complete that pullout from Bihac as fast as possible. And it is then critically important that we get the negotiating process toward a political settlement in Croatia going again. The situation remains perilous, with very large numbers of Croatian troops fully mobilized along the borders of the Krajina region. Nonetheless, if the Serbs follow through and pull out of Bihac, this would be a first step toward a peaceful resolution, but other steps will be required.
But if the diplomatic process fails to deliver, do you think, in fact, the Croatians have the strength to push through and simply take the Krajina?
Certainly the Croatian army has improved enormously since Croatian independence in 1991. It's become much better armed, much more professional. By contrast, the Krajina Serbs have a huge amount of territory to defend, very few people. They've suffered the effects of 4 years of isolation and economic sanctions. So I think the Croatians would certainly have a very good prospect. But it's not easy terrain, and it would be costly. It would involve a significant loss of human life, and that would be a tragedy.
Well, the other thing, of course, too, is the danger that in any action, that Zagreb would provoke President Milosevic in Serbia proper.
There is that danger. The Croatians obviously either believe that Milosevic will not intervene or that they have the strength to withstand a Serbian response, which most likely would be in the eastern part of the country.
Then let me just ask you a final question. Do you believe, in your position, and you've been watching this very carefully and you've been very clearly involved in a lot of the moves towards any sort of a peace process, are we on the cusp of a wider war?
There is a very real danger of that, and the coming days and the prospects for peace talks underway will determine whether there's a wider war.
Serb forces in the former Yugoslavia, as fears grow that full-scale hostilities may soon break out between the two sides. The United Nations Special Representative Yasushi Akashi has warned that Croatian forces are ready to attack. The increasing tension has been marked by artillery exchanges and an air raid. According to the United Nations, 3 Krajina Serb aircraft